Good evening, First Reformed Church. I've been thinking through this whole social distancing thing that we've been talking about. Boy, just a couple weeks ago, I'd never even heard of social distancing. Now it's how we are to behave. We are to socially distant. I'd like to read a parable to you about social distancing. It's in Luke chapter 10, and it's often called the parable of the Good Samaritan. Hear God's word. On an occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hand of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to the inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hand of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus answered, "Go and do likewise." Here we have a parable on social distancing. And we have 2 people who do social distancing and a third who does not. The 2 who do social distancing are a priest and a Levite, if you will, a minister and the church janitor. They practice social distancing. They come upon this man who has been beaten, and they keep their distance. They go around him. In part, they are probably practicing social distancing because they are headed to the temple to serve the Lord. And there were certain rules about what you could do that would keep you clean and make you unclean. They are practicing social distancing so that they don't become unclean before serving in the temple is likely what they are doing. However, along comes a Samaritan and sees the person laying there, and he helps. He helps from his own money, from his own time, and from his own sweat. He uses the resources he has to help. He refuses to socially distance. And what does Jesus say of the hero of the story? It's the Samaritan. And by the way, the Samaritan had all the reasons, all his own for wanting to socially distance. It is likely that the person laying there in the road was a Jew. And for the Samaritan and the Jew, there was bad blood. The Jews hated Samaritans, hated them. They believed them to be half-breeds and of the wrong religion. The Samaritans only believed in the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy for their Bible, while the Jews regarded the whole of the Old Testament as their Bible. So they had a distinct difference in regards to religious faith, and they had a distinct difference in regards to nationality. And yet the Samaritan bridges the gap, refuses to socially distance, and helps the Jew that is laying there in the road. Who is the one who was a neighbor, Jesus asks? And the expert in the law answers correctly. It's the Samaritan, the one who helped that person laying in the road. Been thinking a lot about social distancing. And who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? Is it just the person who lives here in this house? Or in that house? What about the house across the road there? And the house here? Who are the Zeitema neighbors? And who is yours? This becomes very important as social distancing becomes the right thing to do in this day and age. I am to consider all my neighbors, teaches Jesus. Everyone is my neighbor, and I can have an impact and an effect on anyone by choosing to social distance, by choosing to stay away from potentially spreading a virus. I am spreading love by staying back. This point was driven home to me in this last few weeks because Dylan and I were set to go on a trip to Louisiana next week to go fishing in the Gulf of Mexico. We were really looking forward to this trip as my reward to my son for having done a good job at adjusting to a new town and to a new school in his junior year in high school. And so it was my gift to him. It was also something I'm very excited about. I've done it a couple times. It's a great time. We were looking forward to going. Well, my buddy who was in charge of the trip is a bit more of a cowboy and maverick than I am, and he seemed to be dead set on going no matter what. About 2.5 weeks ago, I already realized this coronavirus thing was really going to change the lay of the land as to whether we could go. And then last week, I noticed that Louisiana was leading the nation in per capita count on the increase in coronavirus infectees. I'm like, oh no, this is going to be trouble. Then a few days ago, the governor of Louisiana shut down the state with a stay-at-home order, and also shut down the businesses that were non-essential. I guess charter boat fishing is still part of the essential because that's still open, but boy was I nervous. Finally, yesterday, my buddy contacted those of us going on the trip and said, "So, what do you guys think?" Now, I had been holding off telling my buddy, and I confess, out of a little bit of peer pressure, I didn't want him to think I was a wimp, and so I had not told him yet that I thought it was absolutely crazy for us to go, so I had withheld my opinion. Now he was asking, but I was still a wimp, so I held back and waited for the other guys to speak first, and they spoke. One said, "My dad is in hospice, and I'm seeing the lay of the land with this virus. I don't want to go. I'm pulling out." Another guy said the very same thing. Then my buddy responded, and he said, "Well, I can go either way." And finally, it was my turn, and I said, "I think the best thing I can do for my son and for myself and for all of you and for my neighbors is to not go." And so out of love for them and for my family, we socially distanced. How about you? Social distancing right now is a great act of love. Would you do this unto the Lord? Thank you. And I have a little visitor, and so I am going to get off this road. Bye-bye.